Namaste and welcome to Urban.chatterati. This is Abhinav Prakash. And today I'm joined by a very special guest, Shyam Babu ji, who is a senior fellow at Center for Policy Research and who has been working on and researching a very interesting phenomena in the post-reform India, that is the phenomena of Dalit capitalism. Can access to market, can capitalist order counter the age-old problem of the Dalits of social exclusion, untouchability, and lower socioeconomic mobility? So, sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, sir, let's start from the very basic itself. What exactly is Dalit capitalism?
Okay, Dalit capitalism, the work I have done, I don't want to claim the total credit for that. It's a giant work. My good friend Chandraban Prasad, who coined the expression, and Professor Devesh Kapoor, now at the Johns Hopkins University. We three together for the past more than a decade have been working together. First, we did some survey on how economic reforms are transforming the lifestyle of Dalits in one block in eastern UP, that is Bulandshahr. Azamgarh district. The other block is in Bulandshahr in western UP. We have done that study. We found that economic reforms, even though the intent was not to help lower castes or anything, but ended up helping the Dalits in several areas, especially the areas we studied. From there, we thought probably if economic reforms were positively influencing the poorest of the poor among the community, could it be possible that these reforms might be encouraging Dalits to get into entrepreneurship of one kind or the other? Then we took a large survey and we found several of them, and we did a book also on that. So we got a lot of notoriety also for that.
Yes, but it seems like a completely new construct, and it's a very radical construct, because normally when we have talked about the issues of Dalits and the depressed classes, the terminology has been more about Garibi Hatao, it has been more about Samajwad, it has been more about social justice. But here you have a new construct, Dalit capitalism, which goes against all of these standard notions of Dalit emancipation. I mean, you're not talking about social justice per se, you're not talking about Garibi Hatao, you're talking about Amiri Badhao basically, and then you're not even talking about socialism. So does it have wider acceptability?
Okay. By the way, when you say that Amiri Badhao, you are actually saying Garibi Hatao. So, from Dr. Ambedkar onwards, Dalits have been taking inspiration from the examples of African Americans in the US. That's why you have Dalit Panthers here, the way they had Dalit Panthers. And Dalit capitalism also is actually, has been influenced by Black capitalism. Chandraban started a magazine called Dalit Enterprise. Just like they had in the US, still they have Black enterprise. So as an intellectual construct, in India it is new, but its historical and intellectual roots are very much global. Any marginalized community at the very nascent stages of nationhood would struggle for minimum civil liberties, for example. But as the economy grows and other groups also, some kind of a trickle-down happens. That's how the whole concept of Dalit capitalism started. By the way, much before all the intellectuals talked about Dalit capitalism, Dalits themselves started going into entrepreneurship. It's natural. In a growing economy, more and more groups would find their way, because it's impossible to get salaried jobs either in government or in private sector. But what will they do? Not everybody can't go into farming. Not everybody can't start a factory, because of the very concept of outsourcing. Is part of both capitalism and industrial revolution. It was never one factory producing everything and packing it and selling. A very industrial process promotes auxiliary manufacturers around. So there are very less entry barriers for those kind of activities. So naturally, people opt for that. We don't need to tell them. It's a natural process.
Yep. But when we talk about the Dalit communities in India, the Dalit castes in India, the main point has been social exclusion, untouchability, discrimination. Can this Dalit capitalism, or has it in any way helped them overcome these social barriers and this othering and exclusion done by the other communities?
Caste and caste discrimination and untouchability are such entrenched matters for centuries. No one force can eradicate them. Now, the Dalit capitalism is but, in a way, at the latest stage of Dalit struggle to acquire some equal citizenship. Go back to the 19th century. It was the British which granted equal rights to both upper caste and lower caste through IPC. So they got their civil liberties in the 19th century itself. Then Constitution built on that. And the fact that we have been running a liberal democratic order since 1950, let us question that. Let us criticize that. It is imperfect. Even now, it is imperfect. But it doesn't mean that it is not a democracy. The democratic process itself is going forward in India. We don't like the tardiness. We want it too fast. But at least it is going forward. So that's how Dalits could find their place in that. Is it going to end everything? No. It's an ongoing process. How this process will unfold in future depends to a large extent on how Indian economy is going to fare well. For India, it is we sink together or we swim together. If Indian economy in Bombay or Ludhiana thrives, every other group, including Dalits and tribals, would find their space.
Yep, that's a very important point. So you're saying that this Dalit capitalism is basically the process or part of the journey of democratization of Indian society.
Yes.
So just like in the political realm, the movements by the Dalits democratized it, gave them a space. So even in the economic realm, this movement of Dalit capitalism aims at giving or making them stakeholder in the India's economic journey. That's a very important point, sir. But there are many critiques of this Dalit capitalism. They say that this is just replacing one form of exploitation with another form of exploitation. And also, those Dalits who are coming from villages, they're only ending up as glorified mazdoors, from agrarian laborers, so they are laborers in shopping malls and so on. So what do you think of that critique, that it's really not helping them per se, simply changing the form or nature of exploitative order?
Reduction ad absurdum. We can reduce any argument to the level of an absurdity. Everything is exploitative, yes, but as long as you run a democracy, you run rule-based system, people will find their way. We are not saying that capitalism is a kind of a very egalitarian order. The elite, the strong, the influential, those who are in large in numbers in any society would rule. That's a natural process. You don't accept it, but you need to create some kinds of safety valves, escape mechanisms for everybody to, through their hard work and labor, come out. That's to a large extent our system has provided. So I don't want to go into, by the way, when we say Dalit capitalism, we don't really focus on the economic and financial aspects of capitalism. You talk about financial capitalism and all that. What we focus is the social aspects, what Schumpeter talked about, the creative destruction that capitalism does. You have seen, I don't know what was your age in 1991. So in the past 3 decades, okay, don't tell me.
3 or 4 years maybe.
3 or 4 years, but I have seen that. Between 1991 and say, let us 2010, when we studied Dalits in the eastern Uttar Pradesh, a very modicum of economic reforms implemented in a piecemeal and not too sincere a manner, but still they delivered social results, not economic. I'll give you one example. Because of economic reforms, there was growth in urban areas. You have a lot of pull factor for rural masses to come as construction workers, as labor in factories, or as auto drivers. You may dismiss that as saying that these are very low-end jobs. But for those who came out of the villages, it's a liberation for them. Are you from Uttar Pradesh? Yeah. Now, but for example, what do they say people who come to cities?
I'm not getting the point.
Palayan.
Yeah. Palayan.
So these villages are like prisons for these people. Even with that low base, they came to cities. Then what happened? It created, at least in the areas we studied, it created labor shortage. The landlords and big farmers didn't know how to deal with labor shortage. They thought buying tractors would fix it. It didn't fix it because they were not used to do the farming. They were only landlords, but they would never enter the land. To a large extent, I'm not talking about small farmers.
Yeah.
Now, what did they do? So what did they do then? They had to give those lands on sharecropping basis to the same Dalits there. So from an agriculture labor, the same Dalit is becoming a kind of a sharecropping, means you're a partner now. The transformation did not take place for hundreds of years. So we are at a very nascent stage of this process. This is not the time to give the final judgment on that.
Yes, this resembles a lot with what was happening in the Europe with the rise of capitalism, that the agrarian laborers and the serfs were fleeing to the city, and which was strengthening their bargaining position vis-a-vis the traditional hereditary landlords, and which transformed lots of things in the social order, basically made it much more egalitarian than before. So are we seeing that process in India? What are the success stories? Do we see any large-scale noticeable change on the ground?
Well, in Europe, at least maybe more than a century of struggles they underwent. Those masses, the commoners who moved to the cities, to the factories, they lived in appalling conditions. No standards, no insurance, not even a weekly off. But since they are the kind of trailblazers, they underwent that process without having any kind of template or a precedent. But in the third decade of the third millennium, capitalism is not the same thing as it was in the 19th century. So there are parallels, but at the same time, one, our situation not as bad as the workers in the late 17th or early 18th centuries. And at the same time, the process of masses moving into these cities, urban areas for work, is not as rapid as it happened in Europe. So our urbanization, our industrialization is pretty slow.
But do you think that this new phenomena of Dalit entrepreneurs and a new Dalit middle class which has emerged in India, is it having any impact on the political culture and the voting behaviors per se? I'm not talking about the electoral politics, but overall political, social outlook of these castes and how they perceive their interest with different parties as such.
I have no evidence to say that there is impact on electoral politics or politics in general, but the presence of Dalit entrepreneurs is having a lot of social impact. That is, having your community person being president or a prime minister or a cricketer would really enhance your self-image. So that is happening, one, because earlier, a generation ago, when you closed your eyes and thought of Dalits, what would you think? Agricultural labor, doing menial jobs, a fraction of them in government jobs. That's it. But now you can think of them as being professors, scientists, now entrepreneurs, fairly successful entrepreneurs. Now, if you go and do a survey among young Dalit men and women and ask them a question, what you want to become, probably a generation ago, a majority of them would have said, I want to become an IAS officer. Natural. That's true for all Indians. And for example, if you ask them the same question, I would say at least a substantial numbers would say that I want to become a business person. I want to start my own company, because now they have the knowledge. Probably, at least in urban areas, you have fairly well-off Dalits, significant numbers. We are talking about 300 million people. Having a few thousand well-off people is no surprise. But the social impact, the impact of attitudes, that's where we see a lot of a positive contribution of the whole concept of Dalit capitalism.
But the many people would say that this kind of entrepreneurship, participation in the capitalist market can perhaps uplift one or two individuals or a few thousand individuals. But will that lead to upliftment of the community or change in the social dynamics? Will that restructure a society which has been highly iniquitous for centuries, as you have said?
We don't see this process as a kind of poverty alleviation or a liberation movement. We are aiming at the change of attitudes. It's there we are focusing on. Yes, it doesn't uplift everybody. I'll give you one good example from history. About 100 years ago, the United States, they started employing black men mostly as policemen. Nothing. It's some. What do you need to become a policeman? Maybe a graduate degree. So many blacks had that. So once in several places, blacks were being appointed as policemen. And what would policemen do? Their duty, go and arrest criminals and put them behind bars. And sometimes it naturally happened, a black policeman would go and arrest a white criminal and put him behind bars. According to one another, it electrified the whole community. Anybody could ask the question, what are you? You are making too much about a small thing. Much ado about nothing. But if you see numbers, but if you see in attitudes, see just a parallel. The attitudes about Indians just about a decade ago, about a generation ago, and now at global level, in the United States or Europe, we had a very negative image. No longer. Because in Silicon Valley, Indians proved that they were second to none. You have Indian CEOs running large companies. Now, when you celebrate their success, are you asking the question that, all Indians have become CEOs? Have all Indians gone to Silicon Valley and doing well? No. So there are several things you need, several instruments to tackle a complex problem like caste discrimination. We sincerely believe Dalit capitalism or promoting entrepreneurship among them is a trigger for the good of the society and the good of the community.
Yes. I was talking to someone who recently did a PhD on the Dalit entrepreneurs and submitted it in JNU. And I was told that how she faced a very hostile board saying that, oh, you are a stooge of the government, you are propagating the government policies, there is no academic credentials in what you have done. One of the person in the panel said this thing too, that your data are fake, what you are saying is not true, and so on. So why do you think that is the attitude, this denialism, that there is a movement, a social churning among the Dalits? And also, what has been the policy of the present dispensation? Because we've seen that the first Chamber of Commerce meeting, which Prime Minister Modi attended after becoming Prime Minister, was of the DICI, the Dalit Industry and Chamber of Commerce, if I'm pronouncing. Yeah. So is the government supportive? What is the change in the government policy and so on?
Well, with regard to the first part of your question, it's unfortunate, but it happens almost everywhere in social sciences. Research is always starting from a hypothesis and testing it, either proving it or disproving it. But in social sciences, you first come up with the thesis, then construct an hypothesis and validate yourself. And if some evidence comes that doesn't suit your thesis, you ignore it.
You manufacture data as well.
that happens everywhere, so I have no special insight into this particular case. Yes, Prime Minister has been very positive and supportive of this idea. I remember I was part of a delegation also in July 2014. In the middle of the parliament session, he gave us an appointment. We spent almost half an hour with him. Then the same December, I think that the conference you mentioned, he attended. There have been several policies. The impact, I don't know. I haven't seen much of a positive impact of those policies. As I said, it's not about how many are uplifted or how many are made businessmen and how many are having decent cars and buildings. It's about aiming to change societal attitudes on these matters. We are so government-oriented society. Everybody wants to have a white-collar government job. Entrepreneurship is frowned upon. Oh, it's a bania profession. Why you want to be a bania? We openly say that. That's not the case with most of Europe. That's not the case with United States. Certainly, that's not the case with China. All the countries I mentioned, there, if you are an entrepreneur, you are respected. Now, in our case, I'll give you one example. I met one Dalit engineer in Bangalore. 25 marriage proposals fell flat because the moment he said that he wanted to become an entrepreneur, didn't want to join government job. That is a nut case. So our journey to really become an entrepreneurial society, not just for Dalits, for everybody, is a long way.
But let me ask a final question. So many research tells us that most of these Dalit enterprises are basically family-run enterprises. We're talking about very small business activities out there. And the Dalits are still present in the lower end of the value chain. So even if they're in business, they are having maybe a company providing security guards or housekeeping, sanitation workers. Some of them are in leather work, but not really in the niche areas of entrepreneurship or the, let's say, technology and other places. Media, certainly not. Do you think that it's helping to change the thing or simply modernizing the old division of labor and reinforcing the old structure of the caste labor?
I think you didn't read our book, Defying the Odds. It's entirely antithetical, so to speak. We also went into the field thinking that we will find a few here and there because dad happened to be a cobbler. Son with a little bit education and a bank loan would start a small shoemaking facility like that. All the entrepreneurs we surveyed, the first generation, not well educated. There's no pattern in the industry, so they were in. They were in horticulture, they were in construction, land, real estate, you name it, they were there. We are a huge country, 1.4 billion. We selected about 20 people to profile them in the book. Research had much more. We have variety. It's not to say that they are not there in the traditional occupations. They are very much there, but we happen to choose the higher end of them because, as I said, we are not looking into how much poverty this process is eradicating. We wanted to study and measure how much social change it is bringing about. So I would say that there is no clear pattern whether Dalits are going into the traditional family-owned occupations and the businesses are diversifying. But my sense is they are diversifying because most of them happen to be first generation, whose parents are either illiterate or semi-literate. Actually, let me tell you, probably is a good place to end. Education, I felt through the survey, is a impediment to become an entrepreneur. Why? The moment you finish BA, everybody tells you to apply for government jobs. You go to university and start writing UPSC. You feel entrepreneurship is kind of below your dignity. You keep on pursuing it. Probably once you realize that you are unable to get any government job, you may become entrepreneur. Probably you will be a failure. But the real entrepreneurs don't have that problem because they don't have degrees. Get some money, go and do something. Those who are very restless, they are not the people, intellectuals sitting and discussing and reading books. Those action-oriented are the people who succeeded as entrepreneurs in our survey.
Very important point, and this brings us back to the Ambedkar's views on education. If you read his views when he was expressing in 1940s and all, he said that the syllabus in the university should be decided by the market forces. Let the industry decide what is taught in the school and colleges, it should not be decided by some idealist or some, social change warrior or some Andolankaris as we have them. Also, he was a great votary of vocational education that, give them training, you give them how to do the work rather than teaching them all kind of philosophy, literature and art. People can pursue if they want, but the mass education should be employment oriented. But thanks a lot, sir, for your time. It was a wonderful discussion on a phenomena which is often not discussed or discussed in a manner to dismiss it, like in the social science departments of our universities. But my last, I want you to make a closing comment on how optimistic are you, given that globalization and the free market economy itself is under pressure all around the world?
I can't really say that I'm optimistic now because of the way globalization is getting a beating everywhere. And the way Indian economy seems to be stuck. If the whole economy is stuck, forget about even anything else. So to that extent, I'm not really optimistic.
But let's hope the process will pick up and Indian economy will grow again and we will see corresponding social changes which will be beneficial for the masses of this country. Thanks again. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, audience, for listening to us. Please subscribe to the channel. You can also join as a member to support the channel. Hoping to see you soon. Thank you.